This is For Your Reference, a sports reference podcast.
Welcome back to For Your Reference, a sports reference podcast. This is the place where we get to share interesting topics and stories that have grabbed our attention while building the Sports Reference family of websites. My name's Charlotte. I'm on the data team at Sports Reference, and I'm joined today by my colleague Aidan, our customer success coordinator. Welcome, Aidan. Could you tell us what that means exactly?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. I have the pleasure of reading and basically our customers. We have a lot of very dedicated users of the website who have a lot of questions about where they can find things on the site, or maybe they see like an error, or maybe they have suggestions of how we can improve the site. So, I get to read all of that and then, let our team know about things that need to be fixed, or, some of these like great ideas that they have, and then hopefully implement them on the site. So it does mean that I dig around our websites a lot because, we get questions about, baseball, basketball, everything. And so I'm always in the sort of various nooks and crannies of the site. And that means it's quite exciting. And sometimes I get to delve into some really fun things and sort of newspapers kind of history, stuff like that, and then we find some interesting tidbits, some of which I think we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, I know sometimes when there's a discrepancy, you end up digging into the historical record and going on the newspaper archives, and that's kind of the source for today's episode, because you came across just an absolute winner of a newspaper clipping about the national anthem that was played, I guess, at the 1988 NLCS game. And this anthem was performed by Kenny G, and the newspaper describes it as a lengthy saxophone rendition of the national anthem before Game 6. Didn't exactly play to rave reviews in the Dodgers clubhouse, especially with second baseman Steve Sax, who shook his fist at the musician after the performance. I'd like to meet him and say, "Hi, Kenny G. You're brutal," Sax said. "He can't even play the anthem the way it was written. The guy doesn't even have a last name. Kenny G, H-I-J. Like he's bigger than life. Kenny G, yes, I'm Stephen S," Sax said. And then we had quotes from a few other players in the newspaper clipping as well. Kirk Gibson declined to review the saxophone rendition, saying some things are better left unsaid. And Mike Marshall said it was a disgrace to America. So yeah, I've kind of gotten through the whole clipping there, but I'm curious maybe what led you to this amazing little find.
So I believe this was actually someone was querying the start time of one of the games in this series. I think we get that information from RetroSheet, and they do an update a couple times a year, and then so we tell them about a potential error, and then they fix it, and then eventually it will come onto our site. So yeah, I was just looking in just to check about what the start time of one of these games was. I found this quote. I shared it with everyone at Sports Reference because, I mean, truly incredible, the lengths to which Steve Sax is denigrating AG's performance here. Like he really was not happy. And of course, it is a gentleman by the name of Steve Sax who is very upset with Kenny G, the saxophonist's performance. So I don't know, there's some speculation that, maybe if your name is Sax, you've heard and you're just kind of sick of the saxophone maybe by that point in your life. Yeah, we had a good laugh at that one.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting. I had a small theory that I checked into the game logs to pursue, which was that maybe he was more interested in talking about the anthem performance than his own performance, and that's why he had so much to say. And when I looked at the game logs, I saw that it was a 5-1 loss for the Dodgers. They lost to the Mets at Dodger Stadium, and Steve Sax had 4 plate appearances with no hits, although he did walk twice. And then the other 2 quoted in the article had 4 plate appearances each with no hits. So I don't know if you see anything that I'm seeing here, but it seems like maybe they didn't want to talk about their own performances.
You think Kenny G was like a plant from the Mets to throw the Dodgers off their game? Quite possibly.
Well, this theory kind of came to me because when I was poking a little bit, I looked at another notable anthem performance, which was Jose Feliciano at the 1968 World Series. And I found an article where the pitcher for the Tigers in that game, that's Mickey Lolich, he was really trying to blame his rough start on the national anthem. And his contention was that the anthem was so long, because it was sort of done in a more creative, artistic style, I guess, that he had to restart his pitching warm-up. And he was so thrown off by having to restart his warm-up. He didn't have enough time. That's why he says that he gave up 3 runs in the first inning. Although the Tigers did come back and win it 5-3, he said, can't blame me for their upstart. It's got to be the anthem.
Well, that's the Jose Feliciano anthem's a really interesting one. So yeah, like you say, that's Game 5 of the 1968 World Series. And one of the things I really like on Baseball Reference is that Sabre have this incredible project. They have the Sabre Game Project, similar to, if you've read any of their Sabre bios, you can find them on Baseball Reference as well, which are these short biographies of players, and you can click through to those from our website. And similarly, they have a game project where they're writing up historical and interesting games. And we also link to those on the website. So if you go to Game 5 of the 68 World Series, you can find the link to the Sabre Game Project. And it talks a lot about Jose Feliciano's performance, because it was, at the time, what you might say an untraditional, non-traditional performance of the national anthem. He's a Puerto Rican musician. He was on guitar, and it was a kind of new interpretation, and not everyone was too happy about this. It definitely caused quite a stir, and there was a lot of blowback, and people were just maybe a little bit not used to it, which is interesting because, of course, now we see the personalization of the national anthem. Artists putting their own spin on it is quite common. But not so much at the time. And Lolich clearly wasn't used to the slightly elongated version that was presented to him.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I did see that at the time some people were criticizing it as unpatriotic. That was sort of a common critique. And it was sort of during the Vietnam War, and so maybe there was an elevated sensitivity there. But even that pitcher, Mickey Lolich, he was quoted years later saying, by today's standards, it would have been considered fantastic. So he's actually a fan of the national anthem rendition. He thinks cost him his start. But yeah, I thought that was
I'm inclined to agree. I really enjoyed that performance. I think you should definitely go check it out if you're listening to this podcast, because I think it's a really nice rendition.
Do you think it was long enough to disrupt a whole pitching warm-up?
Once again, I am skeptical of these excuses being made after the fact, but we do know that pitchers are creatures of habit. I think there was that incident, was it this year or maybe last, with Max Scherzer throwing off the mound, and he just refused to let this guy throw out the ceremonial first pitch because Scherzer's there, and he was like, I'm doing my thing now, and I'm not going to let anything get in the way. So I can understand that there's a certain rhythm, but I don't think the anthem was too much longer than the usual one.
Yeah, I don't think they even ranged too much. I know I looked for some timing intervals on the national anthem, and of course they track that every year at the Super Bowl because a lot of people bet on it. And over 15 years, it ranged from about 1.5 minutes to 2.5 minutes. So not a huge range there overall, but definitely has sort of extended over time as we've seen these more artistic renditions. And another artist who's really been credited with pushing that along with or after Feliciano is Marvin Gaye. And he did a number of national anthem performances in the 70s and 80s. I don't know if you were able to listen to any of those in your research.
Yeah, I checked out I think it was the 1983 NBA All-Star game. And it was interesting because people were kind of cheering and clapping towards the end of the performance, like rhythmically clapping. It was more like a performance from, an artist at a concert, as opposed to this, solemn, reverential sort of crowd kind of behavior. Everyone was just really digging that it was Marvin Gaye singing for them, and that was a great performance, and people clearly that resonated with them.
Yeah, I thought it was groovy. I was like, I would love if a national anthem is something you can kind of like sway back and forth to instead of, the normal, just awkward, shake your foot because it's asleep at a sporting event.
Well, this is, I think, I mean, maybe we can get into this now, but we see all this personalization, this customization of the national anthem, and my theory is that this is, I don't want to say, so people may have guessed from hearing my voice, I'm from the UK, and I'm used to the God Save the Queen, God Save the King now, I suppose, which is pretty short, pretty straight down the middle. It's like 7 lines. I mean, I won't do it, but often when they're playing it at football matches, it's 30 seconds, maybe 35 seconds, and you just don't see that kind of customization. Whereas the US national anthem has this, it's quite difficult to sing. It's got a lot of range of notes. It can be relatively long. You've got that opportunity for drawing out some of the lines and the words. I found this quote from an opera singer, Guido Salmaggi, who said the guy who wrote it must have hated singers, because it's clearly like a fairly difficult thing to sing. So what I was going to say was that you see this individualization. I've shared with you a Cyndi Lauper version of the anthem as well, which is kind of more groovy as well. And that can go 2 ways. People can get really into that and people can enjoy it. But then, as we saw with Fergie in 2018 at the NBA All-Star game, sometimes people don't respond, and the artist has taken a risk, and people have kind of criticized it.
Yeah, for sure. I think even though we've seen a clear trajectory on the trend, it's still kind of a tough area where people kind of tiptoe before taking a full leap into going their own direction with it. I found some interesting quotes from the organist at the Dodgers, and she has been there for over 20 years. And she said, "I just don't feel that, it's a song that needs to be showcased. If a singer wants to do a concert and show off their voice, this isn't the place for that." And the same article talked to the Angels as well. And both organizations really felt like, all right, we're going to bring in these artists to do the anthem, but we don't want to be the ones that are making headlines. We kind of don't want to push the envelope too much.
Right. Yeah. After Fergie's rendition, she said, "I've always been honored and proud to perform the national anthem. And last night I wanted to try something special for the NBA. I'm a risk taker artistically, but clearly this rendition didn't strike the intended tone. I honestly tried my best." So yeah, she's taken it. She's like an artist. These people are musicians, they're singers, and then they're gonna try to bring, as Jose Feliciano did, bring their musical talent to the national anthem. But sometimes it just doesn't quite pay off. The quote I found from that one, I was watching the coverage with Charles Barkley and Shaq et al. on TNT, and Charles Barkley said, "I needed a cigarette after that performance."
Oh, no.
Yeah, so I don't know that sexy anthem is what we're going for, but and that was kind of what happened there.
Yeah, I think a lot of artists probably watched that or, heard that and said, maybe I'll continue to take risks, but maybe this isn't the risk I'll take. This isn't the place. I did have one more in my notes of a national anthem that is maybe the most notorious for going a step too far. Not sure if you had a chance to hear the delightful rendition of Roseanne Barr at a 1990s Padres doubleheader. That was July 25th, yes. 1990.
Yes, unfortunately, I did listen to that one. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think singing would maybe be generous. I'm not sure what would be the correct adjective, maybe belted, screeched, something along those lines.
Yeah, it was, well, that's an instance where you kind of wonder what they were expecting. The people we've talked about so far have been musicians and singers, and Roseanne is clearly not. But there was an extra level to that performance, wasn't there? Because she sort of pantomimed being a baseball player by grabbing her crotch and spitting as she walked off the field. And in addition to the as you might, screeching of the national anthem that didn't go down too well. I believe with some elected leaders of this country had some things to say about that as well.
Yeah, I did hear that George H.W. Bush called the performance disgraceful. And the quotes that I had from the clubhouse that day, the players actually weren't really clued into what was going to be happening. We had one of the players saying, I thought maybe she had a hidden talent. Another player saying, I really thought she was going to come out and try her best to sing the anthem. But of course, she had a comedy show by her own name, Roseanne, that was, I guess, premiering around that same time. And this was also, just coincidence, right when ownership of the Padres had transferred from Joan Kroc to Tom Werner. And so he thought, what a great chance to promote my TV show at my ballpark.
Hey, get that vertical integration going. That's what the fans love.
Yeah. So as far as I know, in the past, 20, 30 years since then, nobody's tried to promote a comedy show via national anthem. So maybe the lesson has been learned that's not well received. Because I heard She did not stay for the game. She got out of there. She was getting booed.
I think that was probably the right move. It was interesting reading some of the letters to the editor in some newspapers afterwards, because they were kind of split. You had a lot of people going, this was an absolute disgrace. How dare she? What were they thinking? But then you also had people reacting to George H.W. Bush's comment about it being disgraceful and saying, well, hang on a minute, like you're the president. There are other things that really should be that are disgraceful that you should be paying your attention to, and this, while no one, I think, can say that they enjoyed the artistic value of the performance, maybe they might not have considered it the most the worst thing in the world.
I think that was most of the performances that I looked into on this little rabbit hole inspired by the article. But I did have one other question, which was, I started to just ponder, why do we even have the national anthem at sporting events? When did that start? I don't know if you have any background on this question.
Right. So, yeah, the Star Spangled Banner, it used to be the sort of, it was the anthem, I believe, for the Navy. And it was during the First World War that you started seeing it being played. I think it was played during the 7th inning stretch during the first game of the 1918 World Series. So it was, a time of heightened patriotism. So, you had this song associated with the Army and the Navy being played at a sporting event, and, you would have had a band performing it back then. And then it becomes the national anthem, I think, in the 1930s. And you can, there's a quote from John Thorne, who's the official historian of Major League Baseball, who says, the outpouring of sentiment, enthusiasm, and patriotism at the 1918 World Series went a long way to making the song the national anthem. So, sport was pivotal, arguably, to making the Star Spangled Banner the anthem of the United States. But it's not until the Second World War, I think, that it starts becoming a more prevalent thing at sporting events, because you could have sort of loudspeaker technology allowing you to play that at the event at every game, instead of having to get a brass band for every performance, which wouldn't have been a realistic thing to do for 154 games in a season.
Yeah, I think that the anthem was played as early as the 1800s, like during the Civil War. But it just wasn't very common because you didn't have a band at every baseball game. And it was so popular during World War I, but again, the lack of speaker systems and the expense of the brass bands. And so when we had another surge of patriotism in World War II, finally the technology was kind of ready to keep up with this new tradition. Although I did read that some teams didn't implement keeping the national anthem after World War II until we get to the Vietnam War. And then after that, it was basically every single team, every game. So I thought it was really interesting that you could track the rise in popularity with each major conflict that the United States has been involved in.
Right, and one of the most memorable renditions of the anthem was Whitney Houston in 1991, I think, at the Super Bowl, and that was around about the time the Gulf War had started, and there was a military flyby afterwards, and there's flags aplenty in the crowd. So yeah, it definitely has these peaks during times of conflict.
Yeah, and I know that I guess like later in the 2000s when the Iraq war became unpopular, the NFL did sort of reduce the patriotic imagery and the focus on, big anthems with flyovers or whatever. And so I think it's very interesting that there's not only surges, but also kind of, ebbs or detours. Yeah. And I know, recently, I feel like we kind of have to mention that the national anthem has been sort of a focal point for protests, at sporting events. And even there was an effort by the Dallas Mavericks in the NBA to remove the national anthem from their pregame ritual, which they did successfully for a few months, although they were stymied in their efforts by both the NBA, which clarified their rules and said, no, every team has to have the national anthem, as well as the Texas government, which said every sports team with public funding has to do the national anthem. So based on that, swift reversal and response, do you think we'll ever see a day where the national anthem really falls out of favor?
At being played at sporting events, it's difficult to imagine, isn't it? Because even if one team or one owner decides that this is something they don't want to do for every single game, you have the leagues putting pressure, the NBA in that instance, and as you said, even local government. So it's hard to imagine that there'll be enough of a sort of movement that would be like, we don't want to do this. It's had so much tradition. It has been played, as you say, pretty much every single day at baseball games in particular for over 50, 60 years now. So it's hard to sort of imagine that would be a thing, but who knows? I mean, it's clearly developed separately. Like I said, in the UK, we play the national anthem ahead of big international games, obviously, and the FA Cup final, but not ahead of just a regular Premier League game. So it's just developed differently in the United States, and I think that tradition it seems unlikely that would go away anytime soon.
I know there was some consideration when Major League Soccer started in 1996 of following that, British or European model and saying, hey, we're, trying to maybe mimic the success of the Premier League. They don't do an anthem, but it just really wasn't an option because they're an American sports league and every American sports league follows this tradition. So
that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, a new league would have that opportunity to make that choice, but you can just see the blowback if they didn't. So I don't know about that.
I know. I was going to say, if I had to kind of take an edge case scenario, put odds on anything, I know pickleball's getting really popular. LeBron James invested in a team. I'm like, maybe pickleball league is the first professional sport to say goodbye to the national anthem if I had to put my money on something, but probably not.
That's it. If you had to put your money on something, that would be it. Okay.
That would be it. But yeah. I think the smart odds are on national anthem being around for quite some time.
Quite possibly.
Well, thank you so much for bringing this fun topic to the podcast, Aidan. I do want to mention that this is the final podcast of our 12-episode introductory season. We are excited to bring you more content in 2023, and we're taking just a little time off to ponder potential topics, guests, and where that might go. So version 2.0 might sound a little different. And we would love to hear from you if you have any ideas. You can reach us at podcast@sportsreference.com. Thank you so much for listening.